My name is Mila Platt, and I was 34 years old the Christmas I stopped being my family's emergency fund. I was standing in my mother's kitchen with a serving spoon in my hand when I heard my parents out in the hallway, planning out loud which of my rooms my sister's kids would get. They meant my condo. $350,000 worth of downtown Denver. 11 floors up. My name. And nobody else's on the deed. Rent-free, they said. Starting in April. Nobody had thought to ask me, because nobody in that house had ever needed to. I put the spoon down on the counter. I walked back into that dining room and I smiled and I said absolutely nothing. And then I let them spend the next 3 months packing boxes and picking paint colors and telling the whole family what a generous person I was. What I did while they packed is the part none of them saw coming. It cost me more than the condo did. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet ones, the people who kept everybody else's books balanced right up until the day they finally opened their own. If you have ever been the one everybody calls when the money runs out, you already know how this story starts. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Here is what I do for a living, because it matters. I am a certified public accountant in Denver, and I audit homeowners associations. Condo buildings, mostly. I go through their books, their delinquency ledgers, their reserve funds, the money a building sets aside so that when the roof fails in year 29, nobody has to sell their unit to pay for it. My job is to walk into a room of 90 people and tell them the number they have been telling themselves for a decade is not the real number. I am good at it. I have been doing it for 12 years and I have never once softened a figure to make a board feel better. And every month, for 8.5 years, an automatic transfer left my checking account and went to the payment portal of a homeowners association in Arvada. For my parents, $555. It started at $290 in August of 2017, right after my father's shoulder surgery, and it started as 6 months. 6 months, just until Dad's back on jobs. My mother's words. I set it up on a Tuesday from my desk between 2 client calls, and I never set an end date, because you do not put an end date on 6 months. Nobody ever ended it. It just kept running. The way a light stays on in a stairwell nobody uses. I want you to sit with the joke of that for a second. I make my living finding the line item a group of people forgot to stop paying, and I had one running out of my own account for 8.5 years, and I had never once added it up. Christmas dinner was at my parents' house in Arvada, the same brick ranch off Ralston Road they have lived in since before I was born. 11 of us that year, which meant the folding table came out and got shoved against the good one and covered with a tablecloth that didn't quite reach. My sister Nadine was there with Trey and the kids. My father carved. My mother directed. At some point somebody wanted the soup ladle, and I went into the kitchen to find it. And that is where I was standing when I heard my mother out in the hallway with her phone on speaker. She was talking to Nadine, who was 15 feet away in the dining room, which tells you something about how that house works. The lease in Westminster was up March 31st. The landlord wanted $2,400 a month to renew, and they could not do $2,400. So here was the plan, said my mother. And she said it the way you read a schedule out loud. Nadine and Trey and Josie and Milo would move into my place downtown. Rent-free, of course. The building had a doorman and an elevator, and it was closer to Trey's people. My father's voice came in underneath hers. Easy, amused, absolutely certain. She won't say no. She's never said no. And then my mother said the sentence I have carried around ever since, in the flat, warm, reasonable voice of a woman splitting a check. She doesn't need it. She's the one who can afford to be generous. Then they moved on to which bedroom Josie would get. The small one faced the parking lot, my mother said, so probably the big one, since Josie was older. I stood there with the ladle in my hand and listened to 2 people assign my rooms while my soup went cold on the stove. I set the ladle down. I want to be precise about this, because people always assume the quiet ones are frozen. I was not frozen. I made a decision in that kitchen, which was that I was not going to hand them a scene they could tell later. Anger in my family is a currency, and whoever spends it first loses. So I picked the ladle back up, and I carried the soup in, and I served my father first, because he likes to be served first. And then dinner just went on, except now I could hear the whole thing in a different key. Nadine asked, very casually, whether my building had assigned parking. Just curious. Trey wanted to know if the service elevator could take a sectional. My mother said something about how nice it was that the kids would finally have a real neighborhood. Josie, who is 7, asked me if I had a cat. And when I said no, she said, well, we could get one. Everybody laughed at that. I laughed too. I answered every single question accurately, one space at a time, freight elevator on the west side, no pets over 40 pounds, and not one person heard me answering like a building manager instead of an owner. My father raised his glass and toasted a year where this family finally pulls together. I drank. What I understood by the time the pie came out was that this was not an ambush. Nobody ambushes you with a bedroom assignment. This was a rehearsal, and they had run it several times already, and I was the only one who had not been given the script. I drove the 12 miles back into Denver a little after 9. The Grayling is a red brick building on Bannock Street, 11 floors, built in 1979 as offices and converted in the 90s, which is a sentence that means the plumbing has opinions. Unit 1108 is 940 square feet. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a galley kitchen, and a window that looks down onto a parking lot, and 1 elm tree that the city keeps threatening to take out. I bought it in March of 2019 for $249,000. The deed has 1 name on it. The loan has 1 name on it. There is no cosigner, no gift letter, no family money anywhere in that file, and I know because I am the person who assembled that file. I took a 15-year note because I could not stand the idea of owing anybody anything for 30 years, and then I threw an extra $900 a month at it like a woman with a grudge. That night the balance was $41,800. At the rate I was paying, $2,990 a month, I had 14 payments left. 14. I stood in the dark living room with my coat still on, and did that arithmetic again, because it had become a thing I did the way other people check their locks. I thought about 2 kids asleep in that bedroom, and a sectional in this room, and here is what surprised me. I was not angry. I looked around my own apartment and saw what I see at work all day. An asset being quietly reallocated. 14 payments. That was the number I went to sleep on. The family group chat woke up on the 26th. It is called Platt Family, and it had been dormant since somebody's birthday in October, and now it would not stop. My mother opened with, "Let's talk logistics after New Year's," which is her way of announcing that a decision has finished being made. Nadine sent a photo of 11 flattened moving boxes stacked in her hallway. Trey asked whether the 11th floor allowed bikes in the corridor. My mother sent a photo of a crib she had found on a resale page for $40, for Milo, for the small room. Then my Aunt Della, my dad's sister down in Pueblo, texted me privately. "Your mom says you're taking the kids in. That's lovely, honey. Not one message in 3 days was a question. Not one had a question mark anywhere in it. I read all of them and I put a heart on the photo of the crib, and I answered nothing else." 2 days later, I was in a conference room on the 16th floor of a building on 17th Street, telling the board of a mid-rise in Capitol Hill that their reserve fund was $700,000 short of what their own engineer said they needed. A man in a quarter zip told me their books had always balanced. And I said the thing I say 4 or 5 times a year, in the same tone I always say it. "You didn't lose the money. You just never wrote it down." He nodded slowly, the way they do. I walked back to my office, sat down, and did not open my laptop for a full minute because I had just diagnosed myself in front of 9 strangers and gotten paid for it. My mother called me on January 2nd at 7:40 in the morning, which is when she calls, when she wants to catch me before my day starts. She did not ask me anything. She updated me. The lease was up March 31st, so they would need keys about a week early to get the painting done. Trey had a friend with a truck, and there was the small bedroom at their house in Arvada if I wanted it during the transition, since I was on my own anyway, and the commute wasn't bad. She talked about my apartment in the present tense, the way you talk about a shared cabin. Not, if Mila agrees. Not, We should ask. Just, they'll need keys the week before. I stood in my kitchen holding coffee I had not drunk yet, and I asked her one question. How long is the transition? And my mother said, until they're on their feet. I asked her for a number. 6 months, a year. What are we saying? And she laughed at me, warm and fond, the way you laugh at a child who has counted the presents. You and your numbers, she said. Then she told me she had to go. The dog needed out. I stood there for a while after she hung up. Until they're on their feet. I had heard that exact phrase before. August of 2017, on a Tuesday, sitting at my desk setting up a transfer for $290 a month, just until your father's on his feet. The same phrase, word for word. The same warm voice. 8.5 years and nobody had ever come back and told me they were standing. That same afternoon, Friday the 2nd of January, I drove out to Arvada with a coffee cake, and I sat with my father in the garage, which is where he goes. He was retired plumbing, 31 years, and the garage is still full of copper stubs and fittings in coffee cans, sorted by size, because whatever else my father is, he is organized about small things. He was cleaning a pipe wrench with a rag. We talked about the Broncos. We talked about his shoulder, which still aches in the cold, and about his sister Della, who had a fall in November and was fine. And then I asked him one question, one clean question, the way I ask a treasurer a question when I already suspect what the ledger says. Dad, if I say no, what's your plan B? He laughed. He tapped the wrench twice against his knee, and then he answered me in my mother's exact words, in my mother's exact rhythm, like a man reciting a prayer he learned young. You don't need it, honey. You're the one who can afford to be generous. I sat on that upturned bucket and I looked at my father, 66 years old, a good man in most ways, a man who taught me how to sweat a joint when I was 9. And I understood something that took the heat right out of my chest. There was no plan B. There was no plan B because I was not a person who could say no. I was a line in a budget. And you do not prepare a contingency for a line in a budget because line items do not have opinions. I finished my coffee and told him the cake was from the place on Wadsworth he likes, and I drove back into the city. The next night was a Saturday, and I did the thing I had been avoiding for 8.5 years. I sat down at my own dining table with 2 monitors and I opened my own books. It is a boring process and I am going to describe it anyway, because the boredom is the point. I logged into my bank and exported every transaction from January of 2017 forward as a comma-separated file. I pulled it into a spreadsheet. I built a column for payee, a column for category, a column for whether the money had gone to my parents or to my sister or to something on their behalf. Then I went line by line. This is what I do for clients. I have done it on buildings with 4,000 transactions a year, and I have never needed a break. Around row 300, I got up and drank a glass of water standing at the sink with the lights off. There was a $200 transfer in November of 2019 with the memo line, tires. I did not remember it. There was $640 in March of 2022 memo line, furnace guy. I did not remember that either. That is what got me, more than the totals did. Not that I had given it. That I had given so much of it without keeping any of it in my head, because keeping it in my head would have meant knowing. 12 years I have spent finding the money other people stopped looking at. I balanced everybody's books except the one with my name on it. The file was still running when I finally went to bed at 2. Sunday morning, I finished it, and the number came up in the corner of the sheet the way numbers do, in a little gray sum box, without any ceremony at all. $59,780, 8.5 years. Here is the breakdown, because I want you to see that it is not one dramatic gift, it is a drip. 42 months at $290, from August of 2017 through February of 2021, 12,180. 60 months at $555, March of 2021 through this February, 33,300. Loose transfers, the shoulder, the furnace, the transmission on my mother's Camry, the tires, 9,600. And in 2021, the association in Arvada levied a special assessment and my parents' share was $4,700, and I paid it in one piece so it would not sit on their account accruing interest, $59,780. I sat there and did the only comparison my brain wanted to do. My mortgage payment was $2,990 a month. $59,780 is 20 months of it. 20 months of the thing I had been eating rice for, gone into a portal, on autopilot, with nobody on either end ever saying a word about it. I did not close the laptop. I opened the window instead, and I let the room get cold, and I sat there in my coat looking at a gray box with a number in it. And then a very simple question arrived and would not leave. Where did it go? Not where did I send it? Where did it go? That Thursday, I had lunch with Robin Falk, who is a reserve study engineer and the closest thing I have to a work friend. We meet every couple of months at a PAO place on Federal and complain about buildings. She had just come off a job in Capitol Hill, one of those 1962 towers where the balconies have started spalling, and she was in a mood about it. She said the board had been arguing for 2 hours about whether they could defer the balconies one more cycle. And then she said something while she was fishing basil out of her bowl, in the offhand way people say the truest things. Every association I've ever watched go broke went broke the same way, she said. Nobody stole anything. Nobody was even a villain about it. They just kept calling something temporary until it was structural. I laughed. It is a good line and she has probably used it 40 times. And then, about 4 seconds later, I stopped laughing, and I put my spoon down, and I looked at the table for a while. Robin has known me long enough to notice. She asked if I was all right. I said I was reconciling something. She said, "For a client?" And I said, "Sort of." She let it go, which is why I like her. But I drove back to the office turning that word over. Structural. It has a specific meaning in our work. It means the thing is no longer an expense you can cancel. It means the thing is now holding the building up. On the 10th of January at 11 at night, I opened my banking app and went to the screen called Recurring Transfers. There it was, third from the top. Fairbrook Village Owners Association, $555, monthly, next payment the 1st. There is a red button at the bottom of that screen and it says Cancel Transfer, and I put my thumb on it and I held it there. And I thought about Josie in a coat that was too small in November. I thought about my father's shoulder in the cold and the prescription he does not fill every month because of the copay. I thought about my mother going through her purse at a grocery store in a way I have watched her do my entire life, whether or not she needed to. And I want to be honest about what that moment actually was, because people always want it to be a moment of courage. It was not. I was afraid that if I stopped, I would find out what I was actually worth to them, and I had spent 8.5 years arranging my life, so I would never have to find that out. So I closed the app. I put the phone face down on the counter. I slept on the sofa that night for no reason I could explain, and at about 2 in the morning I said the thing out loud to an empty apartment, which is not something I make a habit of. Nothing in that family ever ended. It just stopped being called temporary. On the 15th, my father came downtown and dropped a manila envelope at my office. He has done this every January for 8 years. Inside is the annual meeting packet for Fairbrook Village Owners Association, which is the 96-unit condo community in Arvada where he sits on the board. He has been treasurer there for 11 years. He always says the same thing when he hands it over, standing in the lobby with his cap in his hand like he is at a bank. "Just give it a look, sweetheart. You're the numbers one." And every year I have told him the same thing back, because it is important and because it is true. I cannot take Fairbrook as a client. My father is on the board and he is my father, which means I have a conflict of interest that no engagement letter can wash out. When Fairbrook's name has come across my firm's intake list twice in 6 years, I recused myself in writing before anybody even asked me to. That is not caution. That is the job. He waved it off the way he always does. "It's not work," he said. "It's family." He took the elevator down and I put the envelope in my bag and I took it home. And that night, For the first time in 8 Januaries, I did not stop at page 3. I made a cup of tea and I sat down and I read the whole packet, all 61 pages of it, the way I would read a client's, with a pen. Page 41 of an annual meeting packet is the boring part. It is the owner directory, unit number, owner of record, mailing address, and, in a community like Fairbrook, one more column that most people never look at, because most people are not us. Fairbrook's declaration caps rentals at 15% of units. That means every owner who leases has to file the lease with the association, and the association has to track it. And every January they print that tracking as an appendix. Right there behind the directory, 3 pages of it. Leases on file. I found Unit 4C the way you find your own name in a phone book, which is to say instantly and by accident. Plat W&G lease on file since June 2020. I read it 3 times. Then I got up and turned the kitchen light on, which I had not needed until then, and read it again. My parents do not live at Fairbrook Village. They live in the brick ranch off Ralston Road that they have lived in for 39 years, where I ate Christmas dinner 3 weeks earlier. Unit 4C is not their home. It is a rental property. They bought it in 2017, the year of the shoulder, the year of the 6 months. And for 8.5 years I had been paying the association dues on it, and then the dues plus a special assessment installment, $555 a month, into a payment portal, on time, every single month, without ever once looking at the third appendix of a packet I was handed for free. I sat down at my own kitchen table and I said, out loud, to nobody, in the flattest voice I have, okay. Then I turned to page 44 and started reading the rest of it properly. I did not call anybody. I drove out there on Tuesday the 3rd of February and got to Fairbrook Village at 6:40 in the evening. It is 4 low buildings around a parking court, beige stucco, 1984, with those metal breezeways on the second floor that ring when you walk on them. Somebody was cooking. The whole second level smelled like rice and onions, and the porch lights had that yellow tint that makes everything look like a photograph from before I was born. On my keyring, between my office fob and my car key, there was a small brass key with a scratched-up head. My mother gave it to me in 2019. In case of an emergency, honey, you're the one who'd come. I have carried it for 7 years and never used it once. I stood in front of 4C with a bag of groceries I had bought so I would look like a person with a reason, and I put that key in the lock and turned it. It did not turn. I tried it again the way you do. Gently. Then not gently. And it did not turn. And while I was doing that, the door opened from the inside. A woman about 30 stood there with a baby on her hip. She had a dish towel over her shoulder. She said, "Can I help you?" I said I was sorry, I had the wrong unit. She said that happens. All these doors look the same. And then, because people are kind and because she had no idea who I was, she added something. "The Platts are nice landlords," she said. "They never raise it." I said thank you. I went down the metal stairs holding a key that did not open anything, and I sat in my car in the parking court for 11 minutes before I turned the engine over. If you have ever found out that the thing you were carrying was not the thing they told you it was, tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this is hitting close to home, subscribe, because it gets worse before it gets clean. I did the multiplication on my phone before I left the parking lot because I could not drive with it unfinished. Rents in that pocket of Arvada for a 2-bedroom in a building like that run about $1,700 a month, and hers had never gone up, which she had just told me herself. June of 2020 to February of 2026 is 69 months. 1,700 times 69 is $117,300. I sat with that. Then I called my Aunt Della in Pueblo, because Della talks, and because she has never once in her life understood that she is telling you something. I did not ask her anything direct. I asked her when my folks had picked up the Fairbrook place, and she said 2017, and wasn't it smart of them, and then she went right on without me. "Oh, and your folks have been helping Nadine since the first baby," she said. "Every single month, like clockwork. Your mother's very proud of that. She's told me a dozen times, she says, we take care of our own." I said that was nice. I said the traffic was bad and I would call her Sunday. And then I sat there in the dark with the heater running and heard my mother's voice come back at me across 6 weeks. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly warm. She doesn't need it. She's the one who can afford to be generous. I had not been keeping my parents afloat. My parents had never been sinking. For 6 years I had been my sister's income, and I had been paying the carrying costs on the asset that produced it, and every person in that family knew except the person writing the checks. On the 5th of February, I asked my sister to have coffee with me. I wanted on the record that I gave her a door. I picked a place in Westminster near her, and I got there early, and I bought her the almond thing with the sugar on top that we used to split into two uneven halves when we were kids and fight about. She was in scrubs from the salon, tired in a way I recognized, and for about 10 minutes it was actually nice. Then I asked her one question, and I asked it open, without a trap in it. "What's your plan for April?" And Nadine said, without any hesitation at all, without one flicker of guilt, because she genuinely did not think she was saying anything wrong. "Well, your place," Mom said. "We're doing Josie's room sage green. She picked the color out herself at the store." I said, "And if my place isn't available?" She actually laughed. Not cruelly. She laughed the way you laugh when your sister makes a joke that does not quite land. "Why wouldn't it be?" she said. "It's sitting there with one person in it." And then she said the thing that closed the door, and she said it gently, leaning in, like she was giving me something. "You don't have kids, Mila. You don't know what it's like to have nowhere to put them." I looked at her for a second. She had a smear of hair color on her wrist, and she was 31 years old, and she had never in her life had to find out where money comes from. I said that was fair. I paid for the coffee. I hugged her in the parking lot, and I meant it, and I drove back downtown knowing that whatever I did next, I would be doing it alone. 3 days later, my sister posted the paint samples. 4 little squares of green taped to a white wall that was not her wall, photographed in good light, with the caption, "New Chapter," and a house emoji. 41 people liked it. My mother commented, "So proud of my girls." My Aunt Della commented a row of hearts. Trey posted separately, a picture of their old sectional on a marketplace listing, $200 or best offer, because they were getting something better for the new place. And my father sent me a text privately that night, just to me, and it said, "Your mother's been sleeping better." That one I read maybe 6 times. Not "thank you." Not, "Are you sure?" "Your mother's been sleeping better," which in my family is the highest form of accounting there is, because it means the ledger has been balanced, and the balancing item was me. I sat in my dark living room on the 11th floor with the phone face down on my knee and looked out at that elm tree in the parking lot with the streetlight behind it. 14 payments. 59,780. 117,300. 69 months. 11 years. 8.5 years. And not one end date anywhere in any of it. And Robin's line came back and sat down next to me like it had been waiting all week for a chance. They just kept calling it temporary until it was structural. That was the night I stopped thinking about how to say no. You cannot say no to a load-bearing wall. You have to take the load off it. The first thing I did was find out whether there was a road I was supposed to take. On the 10th of February, I called a lawyer named Owen Bragg, who does work for my firm and who I had sat across from on 2 association disputes. I gave him the facts the way I would give them to a client. 8.5 years of transfers. $59,780. A property I did not know existed, generating rent I did not know about, while I paid its carrying costs. He listened without interrupting, which lawyers do when the answer is going to be short. Then he said, "Is any of it in writing?" I said no. He said, "Was there ever a repayment term? An interest rate? A note? A text message where somebody said the word loan?" I went back through 6 years of messages while he waited on the line, and there was not. There were 100 variations of, "Thank you, honey," and "You're a lifesaver," and "We'll get you back when things settle." Nothing that a court would look at twice. He said it plainly. Between family members, with no note and no term, that is a gift. Not a loan. and Colorado gives you 3 years on an oral contract anyway. So even the part you could argue about is mostly gone. You gave them $59,000, Mila. Legally, you gave it. I thanked him and hung up and sat at my desk for a long time with my hand still on the phone. There was no court. There was no letter anybody could send that would make $1 of it come back. Whatever I was going to do, it was not going to be that. On the 14th of February at 7:12 in the morning, standing at my counter with my coat already on, I opened the banking app and went to recurring transfers and pressed the red button. There was a confirmation screen. Are you sure you want to cancel this transfer? I pressed yes, and then the app said, "This transfer has been stopped," and offered me a survey about my experience. That was it. That was the whole thing. No music, no thunder, no wave of anything. It felt exactly like closing out a dormant account for a client, the kind that has been quietly draining a building for years because the person who set it up retired and nobody wanted to be the one to touch it. I put the phone in my pocket. I went to work. I reviewed a draft reserve study for a townhome association in Lakewood and found 2 line items priced at 2019 numbers and flagged them both, and I ate a sandwich at my desk. And at some point in the afternoon, I realized I had not thought about my family in 4 hours, which had not happened since Christmas. Here is the part nobody believes. 2 weeks went by before anybody noticed. 2 full weeks. The 1st of March came and went. The payment did not post, and the association system did what those systems do, which is nothing at all until day 30. In those 2 weeks, I slept through the night twice, which for me is a streak, and I ate dinner alone at a counter with a book like a person on vacation from her own life. On the 18th of February, I decided to sell my apartment, and I want to be clear about how I decided, because it was not a scene. There was no night where I sat on the floor and cried and swore revenge. I ran it like an engagement. I called 3 brokers and got 3 comparative market analyses and put them in a spreadsheet next to a column for net proceeds after payoff and closing costs. Market was $350,000, give or take, for an 11th floor 1 bedroom with a garage space in that building in a soft spring. I checked 2 things the way a CPA checks things. First, the Grayling's Declaration has no right of first refusal, which means the association cannot approve or block a buyer, which means nobody on earth had to be told anything. Second, my gain would be about $101,000, and I had lived there as my primary residence for nearly 7 years, and the federal exclusion for a single filer is $250,000. No capital gains tax. Clean. And then I sat back in my chair and had the clearest thought I have ever had about my own life. Nobody had to approve it. That was the entire point. It was mine. It had always only ever been mine, in law and on paper and in every dollar. And I had spent 7 years living in it like a caretaker, keeping it nice for whoever the family decided needed it more. I was not selling it to punish anybody. I was selling it because I could no longer hold something that everyone I was related to had already spent. I did not put a sign on the building. I took a pocket listing, which means my broker walked it to the people who buy units in that corridor without it ever hitting the public feed. It was live for 3 days, and I had 2 offers. The second one was from a man named Gil Marchetti, 57, a buy-and-hold investor with 9 units in that part of town. $328,000. Cash, as is, no inspection contingency, close in 10 days. $22,000 under my asking price. My broker did what a good broker does and pushed back. She said if I waited until April, put in the new range, staged it, I would get my price and probably a little over, because that building shows well in spring. She was right. She was completely right, and I told her so. And then I told her to accept Marchetti. Because what I was buying was not the best price. What I was buying was a calendar. I needed to be closed and gone before the 31st of March. And there was no version of the good outcome that also let me be there when a U-Haul pulled up. I wrote it in the notes cell of my own spreadsheet, where I write things for myself, in the same tone I would write a client memo. Cost of a calendar, $22,000. Then I signed the acceptance at 4:05 in the afternoon on the 24th of February, and my hand was steady, and I went back to work on a Lakewood townhome study. I packed by myself over 9 nights, and I did not tell one person. You learn things about your life when you box it alone. I kept the reading chair I bought with my first real bonus, which I paid $400 for and would have fought a stranger over. I kept my grandfather's pencil box, the wooden one with the sliding lid that smells like graphite and cedar. I kept one heavy pot. I got rid of the curtains, the 4 dining chairs I bought when I still imagined dinner parties, and a pothos I had never once watered correctly and which had survived anyway out of spite. And the entire time I was doing this, my phone lit up on the floor beside me with the family chat, where a debate was underway about whether Josie or Milo should get the room with the window, my window, and whether the closet would fit Nadine's winter things. Trey messaged me directly to ask whether the washer stayed. I typed back, "It stays with the unit," which was true. Every word of it was true. I taped the last box at 1 in the morning on the 5th of March and sat on the floor of an empty living room with my back against the wall, looking at the shape the reading chair had pressed into the carpet over 7 years. And I thought about my mother saying, "Until they're on their feet," and my father saying, "It's not work, it's family," and a lease on file since June of 2020. Nothing in that family ever ended. It just stopped being called temporary. So I was going to end something. On paper. With a date on it. The way you are supposed to. The closing was at 10 in the morning on the 6th of March, at a title company 4 blocks down Bannock from my own front door. It took 19 minutes. There were 7 places to sign and 1 place to initial, and a woman named Deb, who told me twice that my handwriting was very neat. Gil Marchetti shook my hand, said the building had good bones, asked whether the radiators were original, and did not ask me one single question about why a woman was selling a nearly paid-off condo in a hurry for undermarket. That is the thing about investors. They are the only people in this entire story who treated my business as my business. I handed him 2 keys and the elevator fob. $41,800 went to the payoff. About $9,800 went to closing costs and commission. $276,400 and change landed in an account I opened in January that nobody but me knows the number of. I walked out onto Bannock Street at 10:51 in the morning into cold, bright, ordinary sunshine, and I stood on the sidewalk and realized I had nowhere to go. My furniture was in a 10 by 15 storage unit in Golden. I had a suitcase in the trunk. I booked a room at a Residence Inn on my phone standing right there on the curb. I looked up at the 11th floor one time, at a window with no curtains in it anymore, and then I did not look again. I want to be honest with you. Standing on that sidewalk was the worst I felt in the whole story, and I did it to myself on purpose. If you have ever had to break something clean instead of letting it rot, you know exactly what that curb felt like. Tell me below what you had to walk away from. And subscribe, because 2 weeks later a letter arrived that I did not see coming. The letter came to my office on the 9th of March, forwarded twice, in a windowed envelope with a management company's logo on it. It was signed by Marisol Vance, Community Manager for Fairbrook Village Owners Association. It was 2 paragraphs, and it was extremely polite, and it took the floor out from under me. The association, she wrote, was the subject of an open inquiry by the Colorado Division of Real Estate regarding reserve funding and disclosure. In connection with that inquiry, my name had been identified in the minutes of 8 annual meetings from 2018 through 2025 as the certified public accountant who had reviewed the association's reserve figures. The division had requested a copy of my engagement letter and my supporting work papers, and would I please provide them within 14 days. I read it twice standing up. Then I sat down and read it a 3rd time. There was no engagement letter. There has never been an engagement letter because I had never been engaged, because I had recused myself in writing from Fairbrook 2 separate times so that a thing exactly like this could not happen. There were no work papers because there was no work. What there was was 8 years of a manila envelope handed to me in a lobby by a man in a cap, and 8 years of me glancing at a budget page beside a plate of apple pie at my parents' kitchen table, and 8 years of my father standing up in a clubhouse in Arvada in front of his neighbors and saying my name out loud to make a thin number look like a number somebody had checked. He did not steal from that association. He did something that in my line of work is worse and much harder to prove. He borrowed my credibility every year for free, and he never once told me he was spending it. On the 12th, I sat in a small conference room at my firm with Trish Whitcomb, our managing partner, and Owen Bragg. Bragg had it solved before he sat down, the way good lawyers do, and it was so easy it was almost insulting. One paragraph on firm letterhead. Ms. Platt was never engaged by the association, performed no services, issued no report, and had no knowledge that her name appeared in the minutes. Copy the division, copy the management company. Done, he said. This is a nothing. You are a witness to somebody else's problem, not a party to it. And then Trish, who is 49 and direct and not unkind, said the rest of it. The partner vote is in June, Mila. You have been in line for that seat for 10 years. It is worth about $60,000 a year to you, and a great deal more than that over time. So say it on paper, let the lawyers own it, and do not be interesting between now and the summer. She meant it as protection. It was protection. I asked one question, and I asked it flatly, because I already knew the answer and I wanted to hear it in a room. What happens to the 96 owners? Trish looked at me for a second and said, honestly, kindly, and correctly, that is not your engagement. And she was right. That was the whole problem. That was exactly the sentence I had been living inside my entire adult life, in a different voice, wearing different clothes. They moved on Saturday the 21st of March, a week early, for the painting. I was not there. I have put this together from 4 sources, 3 of whom were shouting. A rented box truck double parked on Bannock with the hazards on. A pan of lasagna on the passenger seat covered in foil, because my mother has never in her life gone to a house without food. Josie in a sage green sweater that matched a paint square, holding a plastic bin with her name on it in marker. And Vernon Boyle behind the front desk, who has worked that lobby 5 years and who has taken packages for me and let me in twice when I locked myself out, having to say the sentence out loud to my father. 1108 sold on the 6th, Mr. Platt. New owners got a crew up there now. My father made him say it 3 times. Trey took the stairs to the 11th floor and found 2 of Gil Marchetti's guys with the kitchen cabinets already off the wall and a dumpster chute in the service corridor. My mother stood in the middle of that lobby and called me, and when I did not pick up, she called me again, and then she called me again. From 11:40 that Saturday morning through Monday night, my phone logged 79 missed calls. 41 from my mother, 19 from Nadine, 12 from my father, 7 from Trey. I was not hiding. I want that understood. I was sitting at a laminate desk in a Residence Inn in Golden with a blue-covered reserve study open on my knees and colored tabs down the edge of it, working. I listened to exactly 1 voicemail, the first one. 11 seconds of my mother's voice saying my name twice, and then, what did you do? Then I turned the ringer off and went back to page 31. On Monday the 23rd at 2 in the afternoon, the association's attorney called me. He was pleasant. He had a deal, and the deal was genuinely good. Fairbrook would execute a written acknowledgement that I had never been engaged, never performed services, and never authorized the use of my name, and the association would not contest a word of it before the division. In exchange, I would not appear at Thursday's annual meeting, and I would not submit the analysis he had heard I was preparing regarding 11 years of treasurer's reports. It would be handled internally. There would be a resignation. Everybody comes out of this fine, he said. And he was not lying. Everybody in that sentence did come out fine. My name comes out clean without me lifting a finger. My seat in June survives. My father, 66 years old, 31 years of plumbing in that town, gets to hand in a piece of paper and go home and tell people his knees were bothering him. and 96 owners get a special assessment notice in the mail in June with a number on it and no explanation of how the number got that big, which is exactly how it got that big in the first place. "Do we have an understanding, Ms. Platt?" he said. I told him I would give him an answer by 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, and I sat in that hotel room and understood what I was actually being asked to sell. Not the truth. He did not want me to lie about anything. He wanted my silence. One more time, and my silence was the only thing I have ever been genuinely good at giving away for free. That night, I did the only thing I know how to do when I cannot think. I opened a blank document and wrote a memo, the way I would for a client, with 2 columns. Left column, if I stay home. Name clear in 14 days. Partner vote in June, a seat I had been walking toward since I was 24. Father retires quietly. Mother keeps her Thursdays at that clubhouse and her standing in that parking lot. Right column, if I go. 96 owners get $4,300 each in a letter without ever hearing why. Estelle Rooney in 2B, 81 years old, a fixed income and a Buick she does not drive at night. A roof funded on a 25-year life that is 29 years old and will not care what anybody decided. And while I was looking at those 2 columns, my mother's voice came back one more time, the same warm, reasonable voice from a hallway on Christmas. She doesn't need it. She's the one who can afford to be generous. And I finally heard what that sentence actually is. It is not a compliment. It is an invoice. It had been sent to me every year of my life, and it was being sent to me again right now, from a lawyer's office. In nicer language, you can absorb this, so absorb it, so that nobody louder has to. At 10:40 that night, I called Owen Bragg at home and told him I was withdrawing my name from consideration for partner, effective immediately, because by the end of that week I intended to have an open file with the state board, and I would not let my firm find that out from someone else. He was quiet for about 3 seconds. He said, "You understand that seat gets filled." I said, "I do." Then I hung up and called Marisol Vance and asked her to put me on Thursday's agenda. The Fairbrook Village annual meeting was at 7 in the evening on Thursday the 26th of March, in the clubhouse, which is a beige room with folding chairs in 7 rows and a coffee urn on a table with a paper cloth on it. 61 owners came out of 96 units. Hal Vogel, who is 74 and has been president for 6 years, ran it off a printed agenda. Marisol Vance sat at the side with a laptop taking minutes. My mother sat in the second row on the aisle in her good coat. I stood at the back with a blue reserve study under my arm and colored tabs down the side of it, and a small brass key in my coat pocket that did not open anything. My father took the floor for the treasurer's report at about 7:20. He was good at it. He is warm and he is funny and the room likes him. And at the end of it he said the sentence he has said every March for 8 years, and he said it easily, the way you say a thing that has never once cost you anything. And these figures have all been reviewed by my daughter. She's a CPA down in Denver. A few people nodded. Somebody said, "Well, that's a comfort." And I stood up. I said my name and my unit status, which is none, and I asked the chair for the time I had asked to be given on the agenda, and Hal Vogel, God bless him, gave them to me. I said the first thing plainly. I have never been engaged by this association. I have never reviewed these figures. No engagement letter exists, and no report with my name on it exists, and if one is produced, it is not mine. Then I said the second thing, which was mine to say, and which I said before anybody could ask me for it. For 11 years I let my name and my license be used in this room as decoration, and I never once asked what was being done with them, and this morning I reported myself to the Colorado State Board of Accountancy for exactly that. Then I opened the study and I did my job. The roof was funded on a 25-year life and it is 29 years old. The 2019 reserve transfer was not funding, it was a plug, moved from operating to make a year look solvent. This association has reported an operating surplus for 11 consecutive years by starving its reserves, and the shortfall today is $412,000.